Hey, welcome to another Football Manager video. And we're back again with TS Galaxy, or TSG, which is the African team that I've chosen to try to win the African Champions League with as the fifth and final leg of my Pentagon Challenge. And we're now into the second season, and we've got to the January transfer window, which I'm realising now you can't call the winter transfer window when you're in South Africa, you're in the Southern Hemisphere, and it's really hot. And indeed, the South African Premier League takes a break in the middle of the season. And so if you look at the league table, and here it is on the left of the screen, TS Galaxy, my team, are now top of the league with 21 games played. It's a 16-team league, so I think we've got 30 fixtures in the season. We've got 9 left to play, and we've got 49 points. Now, if you look at the league table, it's a little bit misleading. You can see Kaizer Chiefs got 2 games in hand and 41 points. So if they win both of those, and in this lopsided league with 5 decent teams or 5 or 6 decent teams, they probably will, then they're at 47 points, we're at 49. So it's a bit closer than it looks, but we're still in the commanding position and doing pretty well. Just to update on the last video and the players we signed, how they got on. We signed 3 players on loan. They almost got immediately recalled. The game is pretty wise to signing loan players to be depth. They don't really like it. And so those players were recalled. And so we really were left with just 2. This left back, Mchunu, who is a tier 2 left back, not really amazingly good, but did get ratings of over 7, which is not too bad. In the system that I play, which is a wing-back system. Whoa, what's happened there? Is a wing-back system. There we go. It's a wing-back system. The guys on the left and the right do tend to do pretty well in terms of average ratings, and 7.2, I think it was, is okay, good, not great for Mchunu. It's perfectly good, it'll do, but it's not amazing. It's not a standout performance. Then this guy, Shabalala, who is a defensive midfielder really with 15 work rate, but we've been having to play him in his so-called natural position of centre-back, even though he's only got 11 jumping reach. He's done all right, 6.98, he's fine, but he would be performing better, I think, for us if we were able to play him in defence midfield. But we've been struggling a little bit for depth. So when you account for the loanees going back, then we are struggling a tiny bit for depth. But we are still top of the league and doing just fine. The other bits of recap. So the finances are looking pretty good. We've got this balance of 10 million, which is really good, particularly in a South African context. And you can see there's a sort of growth there where the club is, it does make enough money at the moment to have sort of a gradual increase in the cash position, which is great. If you look at the payroll, it's been managed quite aggressively and is quite low when you consider we're top of the league. I think we've got, here it is, the 13th best payroll at 1.5 million. When I joined the club, it was at about 2.1, I think. And so we've been managing it down just simply by cutting from the squad the players that don't really fit the tactic. What we need to do now, what we're going to do in this video, is start looking about whether we can find ways to start bumping this wage bill back up. I'd like to see this at more 2 point something, and I'd like to spend some of that money on good enough players. The limitation we had when we did the last video in the last window, which was the August to September window, what I still call the summer window, but of course in South Africa would be the winter window. We couldn't find players that were good enough to warrant spending the money. Now, another transfer window later, we're in a slightly different position, and we can go to have a look at that in a minute. We've got an upgrade to our training facilities completed, so we're now at 3.5 stars, which is not too bad. That upgrade cost us 1.5 million. We need to consider whether to do another upgrade now, which we can. It took about 6 months, and now if we wanted to, we could do another one, hopefully get it finished before the next window. I like training facilities, less so for development in this particular point in the save, more so for the reputational impact. It definitely helps a little bit with reputation to bump up your training facilities, and it helps with pull of players in the transfer market. We've also got in the process of a takeover. Let's see what happens there. I'm not sure we're going to end up with a tycoon takeover in South Africa, but we may find that we have some issues arising from that. But if you look at training facilities, 3.5, we just benchmark that to the other teams up and around the top of the league. We've got 2.5, so that's good. We've got 2.5 again. And then Kaiser Chiefs, I think they've got the best in the country, 4, so they're a bit better than us. We've got Sundowns at 3, and then Orlando Pirates 3.5, same as us, and Supersport 3. So we're in a decent place for that. And if we went from 3.5 to 4, which would be the next upgrade, we would then have one of the best in the country, which would help with player recruitment. And what we're going to come on to do now is look at player recruitment, because I've been through and had a good look at it. Before we look at player recruitment directly, just to remind ourselves where we are reputational wise, because this is important to try and figure out, well, kind of where do we stand in terms of ability to pull the top players in, both domestically and internationally. So we're still at 2.5. If we go on to win the league, you'd think that we'd get up into 3 and be into the same bracket as the top teams. We're still at stride behind. So from a recruiting point of view, the position we're in is we can sign players, but we're going to have to spend a decent amount of money to do so. We're still kind of reaching from a reputational point of view. And from an international player perspective, we're still not as interesting a proposition as some of the other clubs in our league, which does limit our ability to sign players internationally. Now, I've had a look, and I basically realised when I had a look that I'm going to be better off signing players in this window domestically than internationally. And I'll show you what I mean by that. And to do that, we need an old friend, which is the trajectory spreadsheet. Now, this spreadsheet is something that if you look at my previous videos on YouTube, and in particular the videos I made in relation to the time at Arsenal earlier in this Pentagon Challenge, I've developed this spreadsheet in order to understand the trajectories players were on. So not just say from the scoring system that I'll come on to talk about in a minute, which is a website I use, and it may be familiar to you if you watch my previous videos, but not just who's the best Secundo Volante on attack, this guy, because his blended attributes are a score of 12.5. But okay, cool. What's he on trajectory to get? So if he's 12.5 and he's 31 years old and he is, that's one thing. If he's 12.5 and he's age 16, then there's a chance he could go on to be one of the very best players in the world. And how do we think about that? And so I came up with these percentages, and I'll just go over here. So if you look at this column S of the spreadsheet, these percentages are calibrated against the trajectory of a standard Premier League player in England. So if you've got 100% on this metric, 100% on this metric means this player with his ability at his age is roughly in line with a decent low-end Premier League player in England. And that's part of the reason why I'm doing so well in this save, is that you can see I've got 3 players that are South African. That's what this column is looking for. 1 means South African. They are South African, they are young, and they are good. They are good enough to go on and develop into Premier League players if they had the chance to. So if they went into a club where they had the right standard of competition, the best quality of coaching and training facilities at a Premier League level, not at the South African Premiership level, then they could go on and be that good. Now, if you look, for example, this guy called Bongi Nkosi, who is my left back, he is on the scoring system a 12.3 left back. That's not bad. It's about a point short of being able to play regular Premier League minutes. But he's only 19, which means if he was to develop at age 20, 21, 22, 23 until 24, which is roughly when outfield players in Football Manager cap out on their development, he could go on to be rated sort of 13-ish. His attributes blended would be sort of 13, 13.5, which would be good enough to play in the Premier League. And if we look at Bongi Nkosi, we'll see 2 things. One, he's one of our best players. His rating's over 7. He's not doing quite as well as the other guy I signed. Why? Well, one of the reasons might be he's really unhappy. So he's unhappy that he describes himself as priced out of a move. There is interest for him from across Europe, which again just bears out what the spreadsheet says. This guy is good enough eventually to play the English Premier League. He is much better than a South African Premiership player ought to be, or is in his prime. If he stayed in his prime in South Africa, it would be a bit of a waste of his career, which is why he's absolutely unwilling to sign a new contract. However, I had an extension, so he's still got 18 months left. So this is the position of a player like Nkosi and a position of a team like TS Galaxy. Players that are really good are trying to leave, absolutely understandably. The transfer fees that you can get are a function of the reputation of the club, which on a global basis is pretty low. And so what I'm waiting for on Nkosi is for him to get to a point where a club of sufficient standing bid for him. When they do, I will do a 50% profit on next sale or stays with us. And that should therefore give our club a decent financial outcome in relation to this guy, because they'll only bid us 300,000 or 400,000, and because of our standing in global football, they won't bid us more. And even though if this guy was a Premier League player transferring between two Premier League clubs in England, he'd probably be, I don't know, a 3, 5, 7 million pound player, something like that. So that's where we are with Nkosi. And if you come back to this, the reason why I've explained all of that is because I'm just looking for the level. So if you disregard our goalkeeper, who's pretty good, and just go for players excluding goalkeepers, you'll see that in our squad at the moment, we've got players of about 7 players that are on this rating about 95% or better. And my judgment is that 95% in this league is a standout level. A 90 is a good solid player. So if we can get above 95, then we have got a good solid player. What I've done then is 2 further things. I've looked at all the players that play in South Africa that are based in the Premiership in South Africa to cross-check this 95, 100. And then also I've looked at all the players in the world who are interested in coming to my club. I'm doing this for 2 reasons. One is to try and establish the domestic player level so we can start to try and pick off the best domestic players and see if we can get to a completely dominant domestic position. And then I'm looking at everyone in the world who's interested to see if the international players we can sign are worthwhile in this context of how good the South Africans are. And as we'll come on to look at it now, just a bit of a spoiler alert, there are 2 things. One, we can pick off good South Africans if we're willing to spend the money. And 2, the international players that we can sign aren't really good enough to make it worthwhile. That's the conclusion, but let's just go through the process. So here, if you look at this spreadsheet is now all the players in South Africa who are willing to join us. Now I'm going to do exactly the same thing with all outfield players in Africa. This is all the players. These are all the clubs on the left. Some of them play for Sundowns. Some of them play for Orlando Pirates, and so on, and so on, and so on. And then what's their ability level? And if you look over this 100 level that I've identified as Premier League, then we've got, let's just count that, we've got 12 players. So 12 players playing in South Africa at the moment are on track to be Premier League on these numbers. I recognise it's not hyper precise, but they're about 12. Let's call it that. And then if we go down to 95, which is my sort of standout level, then there are about, it says, let's stay above 95. There are about 40 players, I think it is. Yeah, 44 players that sort of stand out as these players are good. If you can get a squad which is consisting predominantly of these 40 players and keep them towards their prime ages, then the chances are you will be dominant in the domestic league. That's the analysis that I think is sensible. And then what I can simply do, and you can see I've highlighted a bunch of players. I've gone through and to every single one of these players. I've done the thing where you speak to agents to try and work out which ones are willing to sign for us and stuff like that. And I've also looked, and this is a new change to this spreadsheet versus previous videos. I've just introduced here a column of contract expiries, because if you look at some of these guys, they have got, if you look at this guy, for example, just take an example, this guy, Siabonga Mukisi, if I can pronounce that right. And he's obviously got, you can see from the spreadsheet, a contract that is expiring in 2047, and we're in January 2047. So you can also look to see where there are contract expiries, and we're monitoring those. The players in orange are the players that we like, and I've put them into various shortlists. I'm just going to run through quickly the players that I like. So at wing back, there are 2 players that jump out. One is called Khumalo. He's got a contract expiry in this season, and then the other one is a guy called Maja. And so if I just go to here, so here's Khumalo and Maja, and if I show you what they look like as a wing backs, then we can see that they both look pretty promising. Khumalo, this is the attributes I look for in a wing back. On the left, acceleration is the one I value the most. Pace, stamina, work rate. These 4 I kind of bracket as the most important, and so does the scoring system. And then moving down, we've got a second tier and a third tier of attributes. And the view here that I'm using, which is a wing-back support view, there are other ones for defender, for segundo volante, advanced forward and attack. These and the keeper, these are downloadable in the description of this video. So Khumalo, I think he looks great. Acceleration, pace in play, stamina, work rate's good, tackling 12. He's left-sided, and he's got his contract coming up. And if you look at Nkosi, who's the player I just showed you before, who is probably a bit good for our league, really, and agitating to leave. Nkosi's here, and Kamalu's a less able player, but with better physicals. And so, in preparation for Nkosi leaving, I think bringing Kamalu in would be good if he's available. Then Maja can play on the right as a wing-back and can also play as a defensive midfielder. He's got the 17 work rate together with 14 stamina, and then he's got the 15 acceleration, 12 pace. So he can play as a wing-back or in the middle as a midfielder. He's got 13 tackling, 11 passing. He's 18 years old. One of the things I realised when I looked at Maja and a bunch of other players that are in broadly similar position, I'll get to some in a moment, is that in South Africa it's relatively commonplace for young players of high ability to have a minimum fee release clause. And one of the things I've sort of realised structurally in this league is that once you start finding the players that are towards the top of these lists for potential, or not potential, but the trajectory they've been on so far in their careers, if you find young ones that are good and they've got the good personalities and they're probably the better players in the league and in the country, quite a lot of them have got these release clauses. 425,000 in the case of Maja. It's quite a lot for a player domestically, but then if you go back and do this trajectory thing, Maja stands out as on the best trajectory of all the players in South Africa. So we're definitely interested in Maja, and indeed I've put a bid in this minimum fee release clause, and I've agreed a contract with him, which I've got on delay at the moment, which I think I will be bringing Maja in. So that's the wing-back position. If we then do centre-backs, now when you go back to the spreadsheet here, we've got 5 that I've shortlisted. And when you go back to the spreadsheet and just do it by the abilities right now, according to the scoring system, you can see that there's 5 that I've got in orange. The better players here are sort of the order of 12 and a half, and there's a cluster of them, and 3 of them have got contracts outstanding. 1 plays for SuperSport, 2 play for SuperSport, 1 plays for Orlando. These players are not interested in signing for me right now, but I'm monitoring them closely. But there's 3 of them, and we're shaping up as potentially going to win the league or certainly qualify for the African Champions League, which is first or second. I think we'll get one of these guys in the fullness of time. They're all in their primes. They're all pretty good. And in the meantime, again, from a trajectory point of view, and you go to the top, sorry, it's the wrong one, go here. The one guy who's on a Premier League trajectory and who's capable of playing minutes, 11.9, this guy called Goldstone. He's 11.9 on the scoring system. Our best guy on the left side of defence is 11.5. And when you look at Goldstone, who's here, he has got a strong left foot, so I think he can play on the left of a back 3. He's 18, and again, he's got one of these minimum fee release clauses. So just like Maja, I think it's a kind of structural thing in this league where the top players, when they come into the game, presumably as the game generates these players, it's generating them with these minimum release clauses. And that's just a thing that it does. And if you can find a player that looks good and has got one of these, and you can afford to do it, and you can pick these players off. Now, I didn't know that when I started this save, obviously, but I did say, I think in previous videos, the plan was to stockpile the finances to get players that don't quite fit the system off the wage bill, and then gradually develop a recruiting knowledge of the league. And what I meant by that is now we can see here the other side of it. We've figured out what the shape is. These guys are going to be good, and we've got the money to sign them. So Goldstone we can do, Maja we can do, and we can do these at sort of 400,000, 500,000 a time, which is a lot for domestic football. But the players are better than that. So if we do 3-year contracts, there's every chance the players will exit the club to European teams, and the economics of it will all make sense for us. So looking at the defenders again, there are 3 defenders that are in their primes that have got contracts running out, and I'd love to sign one of those. But in the meantime, Goldstone, who is this younger player on a better trajectory, is available, and we're going to make an attempt to sign him. So that's all great. And just to give you a sense of the kind of players on the prime players and how they compare with Goldstones, here's just an example of those 3 guys. They're all pretty similar. This guy's great because he's got 19 jumping reach, 18 bravery, and just enough acceleration and pace. I'd love to have this guy as a set-piece threat But you can see that Goldstone, who's the 18-year-old with the 400,000 release clause, is not thousands of miles away from this prime player. But he's 18 years old, and that's the whole point of this trajectory thing. If you can be as good as a prime player in your league, but you're only 18, then you're obviously a standout, and it might make sense that you'll move to a better league. In the case of Goldstone, he's just about good enough with the right coaching and setup to become an English Premier League level player. And we can potentially, let's try now, sign him at age 18, bring him into our club, and all will be well. Just one more to look at, because we've also looked at Secundo Volante, which is defence midfielder, and there's basically another one of these guys at the age of 20, 500,000, one of the best in the league right now, but on track to be better than the league really, and go on potentially to be at Premier League level. And he's called Malodzi, and it's all a fairly similar story. In this case, he's got the 500,000 release clause. He's got 13 acceleration, 16 pace, 16 work rate, 15 stamina. He can tackle, he can pass. This guy's good as well. So what I think we're going to do in this window is we've got these 4 guys we've identified, and they can just come straight in if we can get them signed. And really the key thing to do is to crack on and try to get them signed before European clubs do, because they're good enough to go and play for the Portos, or not play for, but go and sign for these clubs. So now we've identified these guys, now they're willing to sign. And I think they're willing to sign because we've upgraded the training facilities. I think that's what's going on in underlying in FM. We've upgraded the training facilities. That means these guys can develop a bit more in our club. They know that. They're clever enough to see that. And so they're willing to sign. They might sign 2 or 3 year deals. They'll probably want minimum fee release clauses. Maybe, let's find out. And then they'll see us as a useful stepping stone to get to their careers in Europe, which is how good they are. And then for us, we want players that will get us into the African Champions League. And I think these players are of the standard. One more thing before I head off and try to do the actual signings is just to check to see whether or not this is all very interesting, looking at players that are based in Africa, but what about if we can just sign international players that are better? So just keep in mind here that the top players in the league in South Africa are kind of 12.5 on the scoring system, and we can sign a really promising young player at 11.9. This is now all players in the world that are interested, so some of them are South African, and I will just eliminate South Africans just to sort of, this is just now narrowly the international players. And if I do it here, the best we can find is players 12.4. They're more expensive, they're older. This guy is probably the most promising player, just to give an example of the kind of international player we can sign right now. Diamansi Cisse from Mali. He's good. He's got jumping reach 11, so we wouldn't sign this specific guy, but this is the kind of level. It's good. It's not the one. It's not as good as these domestic guys. So having done all that analysis, the identification is there are good domestic guys on release courses, 500,000 a clip. We can sign maybe 4 of them. It might turn out to be fewer. We've got 10 million quid. We've been stockpiling the money for this reason. Let's go and sign them. Let's try and get them into this grid, and that will be the squad depth we hope that we need to go on and win the league this season. So go and do that and be back in a minute once I've played forward and done a bit more of that in game. Okay, so a bit further forward now. It's the 9th of January, and four signings have been made. Maja, who's the guy we're going to have at right back, that's all good. £700 a week, which feels like theft. He can get straight into the team and will do pretty well. Goldstone is the guy who's going to play on the left side of our back 3. Again, 1,800 a week. Absolutely fine. Good transfer. All solid. Looks good. And then Kamalo, who's going to be our left wing back. He's going to make up for the fact that our existing left wing back, who is a good player, is agitating for a move. He's all good. Everything fine there. 4,600 a week, which goes straight into the top of our wage bill, which is just fine. And when we did the new signing, well, actually, there's another guy, but I'll get to that in a minute. When we did the new signing press conference thing, it said this is a player, I can't remember the exact language, but sort of above the standing of the club, which is what you're looking to see. So, again, that's a nice, solid addition. All these 3 guys are looking good. So if we put these onto the grid, we shall see that we've got the new left back comes in very neatly, 12.5, which is better than the Sundowns guy. So that position is now locked down at the top level for certainly domestic football. Maja at 12.3 going in as right back is also good. And then we had the defender goals, so 11.9, bit below where the Sundowns guys are, but he's going to develop, and that's going to be fine. So we're almost there with the back three. It's not quite at the level, but we've got 3 good young guys, and then as and when we can sign better guys, those guys are going to become our depth, which is looking solid. And then we've got one space where there is a gap, because the other defensive midfielder who I'm trying to sign, who we identified in our spreadsheet, this guy Melodzi, struggling to get him, tried to get him, $500,000 release clause, immediately came up, wants 10,000 a week, and is only slightly interested in joining. This guy hasn't been interested in joining, but we're going to try again later in the window, not least because we've signed those other players, which I think helps, because I think one of the things that players, when you the sort of the game's way of deciding whether players will be willing to join you, I think is based on, among other things, how good your existing players are. And I've just added some meaningful upgrades. And also, one thing that happened shortly after those guys signed is that this guy, who is called Tumelo Makepe, became interested in joining. Now, he was also transfer listed by his club, and he, according to my spreadsheet, is the best forward in South African football. So he is looking great. He's left-footed, so he can play on the left of our front three. And if we just look at the spreadsheet that I did and just sort it by who's the best forward according to the scoring system, Makepe was at the top, 14.5, a clear upgrade over what we had already in our squad. The guy we had playing on the left was this guy Beloyi, who can just go across to the right side. And if you just look at Makepe against Beloyi, you'll see that here's an upgrade, a clear upgrade. Beloyi himself was pretty good, so he's got an average rating of 7.6, and he's scoring, or he's got 0.8 goals per 90. And we can shift him across to the other side because he's right-footed and we're just playing on the left because he had a decent left foot. And now we've got another guy, so that's another clear improvement. If you look at Makepe and just come back to this idea of the sort of scoring system and all the things I do around that, I say 14.5, and I'll say when I look at trajectories, that's 100% trajectory, which means here's a sort of bottom-end Premier League players. They go from age 15 to age 24. I think their rating goes to about 14.5. 14.5 is what, where's he gone? 14.5 is what Makepe is, which is why I have him at 100%. Just to show you what I mean by that, if we just go to the Premier League and just find the team that is struggling at the bottom of the Premier League, these are the leads I've got, there's the Premier League, and look at their centre forward, we ought to find, if all these analysis makes sense, that the centre forward in this team is about as good as Makepe. So this is Wolves. They're right on the brink of survival. They're probably going to get relegated. It's close. And this is their centre forward, Arriaga, Mexican, 28 years old. And if I compare him with, what's his name, my guy, Makepe, so what we're going to find... okay, there's some differences. Arriaga's slower and he's more technical. It's just a different type of player. Makepe is faster and less technical. But roughly as quality of players, they're about the same. He's just reached maturity at age 24. This is about as good as Makepe's going to be. There's not that much room for growth. But why am I happy paying $6,750 a week, which puts him at the top of my wage bill, paying the $300,000 up front? Well, because he's basically good enough, just about scraping to play in the Premier League. And Arriaga, who's also at about the same level, as a Premier League player in a Premier League club with a reputation associated with that, the price tag on him they want is 39 million. My guy for 300,000 in that context is a pretty good deal. So we'll play forward, try and find a way to get this defence midfielder to join us. He might be more willing to join now Makepe is signed, might not be, don't know. And we'll also keep an eye on international players as the rest of this window goes on, and I'll come back and report back if there's anything else that's interesting. All right, so back from the future. It's now April, and we've got more or less the end of the season. It's not quite the end yet, but we've just managed to win the league. Kaiser Chiefs have not managed to catch us up. Nobody's managed to catch us up, so that's all good. And the players that we've signed are all settling in well. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 players, all going well, settling in neatly, playing fairly well. Makepe's probably the guy that's jumped out the best. 5 goals in 7 games, an average rating over 7.5. But they're all doing absolutely fine, settling in. The club's got enough depth now to stretch into the end of the season, play all the fixtures at a high level. and win the league. So domestically, we're in a sensible place, and that's all going well. I think the one thing I just wanted to zoom in on is the youth intake. So we've just had the youth intake come in, and we'll just do this before the end of the video, and then we'll call it there. So the youth intake's come up with the golden generation thing, which is super interesting, because since I've started focusing on player trajectory, I've become very interested in kind of what this thing means. What does golden generation mean? And I can't put numbers to it, but it's interesting just to look at the trajectory spreadsheet that I do now. These are the youth candidates that have come into the club. And actually, just show you here, it's quite helpful if you didn't know this. When you get the youth players come in, you do get in this squads thing for a short period of time. You just get a youth candidates box you can tick. And so if you want to then take the numbers out of this, put it in the scoring system, put it in the spreadsheet, it's super easy. And we've got all these players and we've got the potential. And I can just immediately do the trajectories. And if you remember from the beginning of this video, basically in South African football, above 95 is a standout in the domestic league. And then 100 is the benchmark that is the whole purpose of the calculation. 100 is meant to be a Premier League level player. So here, if you look at ours, over 95, we've got 2 in this youth intake, and then we've got 1 who's over 90 called Corley Crace. So Corley Crace is the 3rd best player on this calculation, which is not perfect. I fully recognise that. But on this, Corley Crace, it says the highest. So what's interesting is you've got, and it also said the players led by the very gifted Corley Crace have a real chance of developing into a golden generation. So that sort of standout player you sometimes see come in here. So I think a couple of things. One is the golden generation shows you've got multiple players that are good enough to play for the club. This guy, Crace, I mean, look, actually, he's not that good. Low determination, at least to my eye, at least. He's, all right, I guess, but it's not jumping off the page at me. We will sign this guy mainly because he's English and may have some transfer value going back into the English leagues. But I don't think in terms of even TS Galaxy with sort of this kind of trajectory, it doesn't look obvious that he's amazing. He may well have high potential ability because of this. And of course, the spreadsheet on trajectory is only looking at how they're doing compared to their age. It can't project forward. The other 2 players on here, it thinks that Shanger is the best. Sorry, let's just go here. Shanger is the best. This is Shanger. It looks good. Inside forward, which is a type of player we don't need, and the low composure prevents him from being a forward. He's only got balanced personality. And then you've got this guy with 89% Hlopfer. Again, high potential ability, low composure, inside forward, same idea. And then the other one that doesn't feature on this page, but does Unkobo. And Unkobo is all the way down here and does have an ambitious personality, but looks pretty good to me as a centre forward. So you've got acceleration, pace, composure. Okay, only 7 off the ball, but he's only 15, and then 12 finishing. This is probably the most interesting player, but the point is I don't really need to sign in these guys. This is not a youth-focused save in terms of the guys coming into our club. This isn't really what it's about. I will sign Crace, basically because of the economics of it, but that's going to be that. Anyway, that's where we've got to with TS Galaxy. Where are we going next in future videos? I think we're going to now go into the African Champions League, which is the purpose of this save, is to win the African Champions League and complete my Pentagon challenge. So I will come back once we're there, and then whatever recruiting we feel we need to do for that, I think we're going to hopefully be able to buy international players for the first time. That will make sense. And then once we've got a slightly strengthened squad, we'll go into the Champions League. So that'll be the next one. Do like and subscribe. Like this video, subscribe to the channel if you want to watch that next one. And I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.